feel like my artwork has gone through this sort of whole process where like I used to be like unapologetically myself. Then I tried to sort of mask, and my artwork almost like masked in that process as well. Welcome back for Doodles.
No.
And hey.
Yeah, you guys seem to really enjoy the Doodles and Tea update that we did last week. We thought we'd do like another one for you guys.
I had so many people reach out to me like through the comment section and even like privately saying how much like my video had like resonated with them. And it's just nice seeing that there's so many people in the community who are like understanding of this. Obviously it's always kind of scary to come to terms with like a new part of your identity.
Of yourself, absolutely.
But because it felt like such a safe place last time, I thought it might be nice to...
It's time to info dump.
Yeah. The tea this time, instead of a hot tea, we've got an iced tea.
Yeah, because it's really muggy here. Ooh, lemony fresh.
So, one of the topics that I really wanted to sort of cover in this video, because I wanted to keep it like neurodivergent themed, is how I feel like being autistic has like helped my artwork.
Okay.
But I do feel like there's quite a windy road for me to get to that point, obviously because I didn't know I had autism for like a really long time. There was also the whole diagnosis journey. Mine seems like it took a lot longer than like the average person, although it does sound like the diagnosis journey takes a long time on average for most people.
And didn't you say as well, one thing that really blew my mind is, isn't it harder for a female to be diagnosed compared to a male?
I reckon that's why there's been sort of like so many girls, especially late diagnosis girls, being diagnosed recently, because in the past it was done mostly on guys. So like your average kind of like youngish boy who's obsessed with like trains.
Me?
Yeah, we think that Adam probably is.
Well, I do really like trains, and yeah, there are some things that I don't like. I don't know. That's another thing for another time. This is focused on you right now.
Well,
this is all about you.
Adam knows a lot more about trains than the average person, let's just put it that way.
Yeah, okay, I'll give you that.
So, what I wanted to sort of talk about is that some of like my earlier school memories, I used to get pulled up quite a lot for doing things wrong, but in hindsight, I still don't feel like I was necessarily doing things wrong. I just always sort of found my own way of doing things.
Yes, yeah.
One particular incident, I was in a computer class and the teacher, he'd set up a bunch of like these papers that he'd printed out and he'd put them along like a really long table. And he'd said, I want you to go and like pick up all these papers and stack them like in a specific order. And then sit back down and we were all gonna like staple it together.
Oh,
so
okay, yes.
It was kind of like this class group activity, but we were all kind of doing our own thing within like the system.
Okay.
So everyone got up to go and do it, and I got up to go and do mine. And I was like oblivious to what everyone else was doing. All I was thinking was, I need to like pick up these like stacks of paper. And this teacher, he pulls me up, not in sort of necessarily like a mean way, but I did feel like embarrassed because he was doing it in front of the whole
they
class.
didn't need to do that, yeah.
But he said, oh, there's always got to be someone who's different. And I was thinking, who's the person who's different? And then he goes, Steph. And I'm like, oh crap, it's me.
Oh, no.
Like me, I'm purposely always trying to be as similar as possible.
That's true, yeah.
With like masking. And I was like, how is it that when I'm so effortlessly, like at the moment, just trying to get a task done the same way as everyone else, I'm being flagged as being different. So he then points out that everyone else is starting from the other end of the table and they're walking along and picking up the paper. And I've gone to the opposite end of the table, and what's happened is that I've started to bump into the other people because it's ended up sort of like a queue system where everyone's working in the same direction.
Oh, they go one after another, yeah.
And I was going in the opposite direction, and it was sort of causing problems for everyone else because I was going backwards. And I realised the reason that I started going from the other side of things, it wasn't to be purposely awkward or to get in everyone's way. That's like my worst nightmare.
Yeah,
That's not what I was trying to do. What I was trying to do was avoid the crowds of people, and I saw, oh my gosh, there's a lot of people at the front end of like this queue. So I'm gonna go towards the back where there's nobody, and I can quickly grab those sheets while there's nobody there.
Yeah, it's quieter, there's no one there. Yeah. I think I would probably do the same. I mean, what about you guys?
But me not sort of realising that there's a structure in place that everyone else socially is like following, and there's been like a few examples of things like this throughout my life. I remember once in like a maths class, I just joined like a new school, and I've always been, they reckon that I've probably got dyscalculia, because like that comes pretty regularly with
That's
autism.
something you've always struggled with, is numbers, yes.
Yeah, no matter how many times you can sit and like teach me it and think that you've got it through to me, and then 5 minutes later I'll be like, what?
Yeah. And some people will be like, oh, why aren't you listening? And she is listening, she just struggles to process like numbers.
Yeah, for some reason, I have a really spectacular memory for a lot of things, especially when it comes to like things that I have firsthand done, places that I've been to. I'm not particularly great with like names of locations, and numbers especially I am really terrible with. I can remember like what colour shorts my friend was wearing like a year ago when we sat next to each other, specifically on a Wednesday. Things like that.
Yes.
Are very sort of specific to me, or I can remember exactly what we did that day, what we ate that day, which shops we went to, which like order we did things in. But if you ask me to remember someone's phone number, I am no help. I cannot remember. Even if it's like one of those really short landline numbers. Like, I can't do mobile numbers because they are way, way, way too long.
Which is why she always gives out mine to literally everything. I get so many spam calls because of you.
I can't remember, like, my phone number, so I'm just like, oh, I've got Adam's in my phone here.
Yeah,
Do you want
because
that?
my name's Adam as well. It's the first
It's
one
the
in her
first one
phone.
that shows up. So, ironically, I ended up becoming a receptionist later on in life, which we'll talk about how that was a really terrible fit for me.
That wasn't the best idea, hon.
It does feed into that. So in this maths class, and I was like the new kid in the class, I was bumping into a problem where we were expected to sort of draw like a line, and well, it was almost like an invisible line down the middle of our maths paper. So you know when it's got like squares and we have to imagine it's in two halves?
Oh yeah, I'm with you, yeah.
And whenever I was writing like my maths stuff, we were expected to sort of get to a specific like square, and then we had to like move down in this invisible margin before we then went over and like neatly continued in the second margin.
Okay.
My brain could not do this invisible margin.
Yeah, you couldn't visualise
Yeah,
it.
so for a while I started to physically draw this margin in, and this teacher started showing like my work in front of the whole class and being like, look how messy it looks with this margin drawn in with it.
It's
like,
just...
I know, and it's like, I'm already a new kid. Do you have to point out that I'm doing things like weird?
Like, look everyone, the new kid's doing it wrong. That's on them, that's terrible. They didn't need to do that.
So then I was like, okay, I've got to try and figure this out, because if I do it like that again, she's going to flag it up in front of everyone. I'm going to look really stupid again. So I was like, right, I'm imagining the invisible margin, and I'd sometimes put like my arm in the way so that I'd bump into my arm and I couldn't physically write past it.
Oh.
But I'd sometimes get to like midway through a really long word, and I'd be like, I need to finish the rest of this word, and I want to put it back. It doesn't make sense to start a whole new line to put like one extra letter or something.
Yeah.
So I'd write this one extra like letter over slightly into this invisible margin.
This invisible layer.
And to make it clear that this wasn't meant to be part of like this margin, it was meant to be part of the other margin, I draw like a little square box around it just so that it had a slight border to say it's part of this other part. Well, anyway, she flagged this and she showed it in front of everyone yet again, and she was like, this looks even worse than last time. It's got like all kinds of random squares sticking out of it.
Look, the new kid's done it even worse. Oh my god.
I went home crying that time because I was like, I'm never going to fit into this stupid new school and I hate maths.
And the stupid margin.
Hi art friends, welcome to the Floor of Reflection. Did you guys know that our channel is funded through Patreon, and that's the reason why we're able to still make videos to this very day? So if you want to see more videos, subscribe for one, duh, and also consider supporting us on Patreon so we can bring you even more snazzy videos.
Exactly. And I had an auntie who was like a long-term family friend, and her kid also went to the same school as mine, and she put in a complaint for me, and then that teacher left me alone after that. And
oh, well, that's good. It's
yeah.
good that they stuck up for
Like,
you, because that's not right, singling you out. Especially when you're new. Oh my god.
Yeah, it was really nice that it was like a family friend that did that for me. they were always telling me that I was doing things different to everyone else, and then I was used as an example of why you shouldn't be different.
Oh, come on. It's one thing being singled out, but then being used as an example as well. That teacher had, like, issues.
Well, I kind of get it now because, like, back then there wasn't much conversation around, like, neurodiversity. Like, when I think back to then, I don't think there was a single kid that was diagnosed with autism in that school.
So would the teacher just be thinking you're doing this, like, on purpose?
Yeah, I think it was being sort of like, oh, you're doing this to, like, annoy me. You're doing this to show off in front of the class.
Imagine being autistic and someone taking that as a personal attack on you.
So I feel like this then leads me on to, I went all the way through, like, secondary school, college, university. I started to get a feel for how these systems worked. And then all of a sudden it was completely flipped on its head when you're thrown out after, like, your final year of university and they're like, right, now you gotta go get a job.
Yeah, a lot of people say, like, they're not prepared. Whether you're neurodivergent or not, a lot of people say that they're not adequately prepared for when they leave education and go into work. So I can only imagine what it must have been like for you when you were, like, thrown in the deep end.
It was so scary because I was living in, like, one of the most expensive cities in the world, which was in London.
It's London, yeah.
And all I knew is that I still had, like, rent coming out. The person that I'd previously been living with had moved back to, like, their hometown, so I now had, like, their half
all
of
the rent
rent
was
like,
to you,
completely to myself. I didn't have a job at this point. I'd done, like, freelance artwork in the past, but I can't say that gave me a lot of, like, work experience because I was usually just drawing alone in, like, my bedroom or something.
Exactly, yeah, it's not like out there in, like, a, you know, a typical, like, 9-to-5 thing, for example.
Yeah, I think it's probably because it's, like, such a scary memory to remember. It's, like, brings up, like, a brain
You've been
fog.
repressing it, yeah.
Yeah, it's... My therapist said my brain does this, that whenever I go back to something that my brain doesn't want me to remember, it starts, like, trying to sort of resist it and it pushes against it.
It, like, throws, like, a mental flashbang to stop you from, like, remembering it.
It's like a little smoke screen.
Yeah. No, it is. It's common as well.
And my ears sometimes start to, like, ring while it's happening as well. So let me try and, like, push through this because it's nothing, like, super traumatic that can't be, like, talked about on YouTube. I think it just sets off, like, my emergency signals within my body because I'm talking about a time when...
Well, it's something that deeply affected you,
yeah,
so yeah. No.
When I had a lot of, like, bills coming out of my account and I had no money coming in, so...
It was a very, very stressful time. This was, like, around the time Steph and I first met as well, was
Yeah.
around this time. And you were very, like, anxious and nervous, and I can totally understand that. Whether you were neurotypical 100%, that would be nerve-wracking.
It would be
anyone.
a stressful situation
Yes.
for, like, the best of people,
Absolutely.
especially in, like, an expensive capital, so, you know, it was a stressful experience.
Yeah, definitely.
So whenever there's people in our comments who say that they're, like, leaving university at the moment and they're, like, scared, my heart really goes out to them because I'm like, yeah, I still have, like, flashbacks to that time. And the thing that I really struggled with, and I didn't understand it at the time, but now that I know that I've been diagnosed as autistic, it makes so much sense. I'd been living in a system for such a long time, since I was, like, 5 years old or something.
Yeah, since you were a babo.
The whole premise was I went out and took, like, from, like, 9 in the morning, I did classes, I sat, I listened, I wrote down whatever I was told to write down, and then if there was any homework, I did that, I came back with the homework, and my life was dependent on remembering facts than trying to pass, like, a test.
That's basically school in a nutshell.
Exactly. So for me, the rules of life had suddenly, like, changed overnight. So suddenly how I'd went from, like, the schooling system that had a very sort of structured, like, routine to it, and then it was like, okay, you just need to apply for, like, a job, it could be any job, and you need to, like, get hired, and suddenly the thing that I was being, like, judged on was more so, like, my social skills, which I don't feel like I really got much practice with that in school because I usually avoided people at all costs.
And you had to switch schools, like, so many times as
Yeah.
well. You struggled to make friends because you had to jump around so much.
Yeah, so there was definitely that having, like, an impact as well. And I think even if I hadn't have switched schools quite a lot, I think I would have just always been a socially awkward kid.
You are socially awkward. I think that's quite endearing, but yeah, Yeah, you are socially open, that's fine, there's nothing wrong with that. But I totally get where you're coming from, where you're like, Steph is someone who thrives on routine, did a routine for 18 years, and then it just suddenly changes when you have to go and like find a job, for example.
I know, and then you're in survival mode and your life's depending on it. And it was getting scary because like all my friends that I'd been like going to school and college and university with, they were getting like hired in like these jobs, and some of them were getting like promotions in like these jobs, and I couldn't even get someone to hire me, which it felt so embarrassing. Like it made me feel like I had such little self-worth as a human being.
Did you feel like you were being left behind?
Yeah, because like I'd gone all through this effort to get like a university degree, but then I was struggling to even get hired in something like a cafe or like in a supermarket, so it wasn't good for the old self-esteem.
It wasn't for lack of trying. Yeah, Steph was applying to literally anything and everything that she could find.
I used to literally sit there for like hours on end sending things in, and in the end I ended up being offered an opportunity in it was a pretzel cafe, which I've talked about sometimes on this channel, that still gives me like flashbacks.
Oh yes, another traumatic experience, yeah.
And the reason I got hired there is because I drew them a comic, and I told them why they should hire me, and they were like, oh, this comic's really cool, we want to hire you. And then I think they met me in person, they were like, oh, she's a bit awkward, not quite the personality that we would have expected.
Oh.
But they gave me a chance, and anyway, long story short, I was basically fired after like 3-4 weeks.
That was a sensory nightmare though for you. A lot of things in that job were bad for you.
Yeah, it was very stressful, it was customer facing, I was having to like run back and forth to like a really big heated oven which I was overheating on. I was burning myself constantly.
Yes, you were, yeah.
And I was going home like most nights just like in floods of tears and living in dread, and I was like shaking on the bus whenever I had to get back for these shifts.
I would remember like Steph would come back from her work and she'd be like, because this was before obviously you knew about autism and stuff, you'd come back and you'd be really upset and in tears, as you say, and you'd say, I just feel overwhelmed. That was the go-to word.
My go-to word. And I remember when I first started going to therapy, she was like, okay, so how is it you feeling? And I kept saying overwhelmed, and she was like, that's not an emotion. I was like, oh crap, that's the only emotion that I understand or feel.
How am I supposed to feel?
How am I meant to communicate what I'm feeling if this isn't a valid word to you?
Yeah. It was always your go-to, is just overwhelmed, yeah.
And that's probably like a sensory overwhelm now that I completely understand.
Oh, absolutely.
It.
Yes, yeah.
I was around a lot of like textures and scents, and I was around like coffee beans, and I hate the smell of coffee, and there was so many things like this, and it was in a train station, there was loud trains going past and train announcements of, there is a lost child in this department, can you make your way to... It was just too much.
Steph having a crisis and the woman saying, see it, say it, sorted. It's good. It shows growth though that you're able to, you know, have a giggle over it now.
I can have a giggle about it now.
It was a very, very stressful time.
So when I lost my job from the cafe place, that was even just a part-time job, so it wasn't even enough to pay like all my rent and bills. And I was struggling that hard with that, so I was like, oh my gosh, I need to find full-time work. Or I need to try and find like enough full-time work in like art stuff, which I'm sure anyone who's like fresh out of university knows that that's like an impossible task, to try and find enough to get by full-time living off your art.
Oh, some of the like job applications for those is ridiculous. You're fresh out of university, they're like looking for university graduate with 10 years experience.
Yeah.
It's like, it's impossible.
There was a bunch of those happening. So I was just applying for literally any job that would like pop up at this point. In the end, I had a place come back to me and they'd said, yeah, we'd love to hire you, but we are like an hour or two away. And I was like, you know what, at this point, I don't care. I will come. I am ready.
Yeah, exactly.
And then they said, but it is an unpaid position. I was like, oh my God, why is life like this? The only people who
4 hours of travelling a day for free. Oh my God.
I was like, yeah, I literally can't afford to do that. I didn't realise. I was applying to so many jobs, it was on me. I didn't realise that I'd applied for this job that was
well, you were just applying to, like you say, as much as you could at the time, yeah. Yeah,
so I'd accidentally applied to this job that was like an unpaid one, and miraculously I'd managed to get it because probably nobody else had applied.
No, don't say that.
But after applying, there was one place that was desperate for workers, and they were a temp agency. And this ended up being kind of like my calling, because I was so used to being like a new kid and being thrown into like new environments and being overwhelmed all the time. I can't say I thrived in it, but I was used to that experience.
Yes, a trauma I'm used to.
And they were like, look, you don't really have the experience, well, you don't have any experience, but we are desperate for like workers right now because it was the summer season, and in summer that's when most office workers are like off sick, or when they're
they go on holiday.
Yeah,
stuff.
pulling holidays, or they're sick in
quotations.
they're usually like hungover. So I used to get like quite a lot of this temp work. And it used to be like I'd only have to work there for like one day in a specific office, but they would give me specific like addresses of an office that I had to get to, and they'd say to me, you've got to be there within 30 minutes, and this place would be like an hour away.
It could be anywhere.
And I'm already bad with directions. I have no sense of direction whatsoever. So I'd always be crying on the phone to Adam saying like, look, I've got an address and I'm shaking, I'm scared, I don't know how to get there. I'm already scared about the job that I know I'm going to be crap at, but I just need to
We'd
get
get it up
there.
on like Google Maps Street View, wouldn't we? And we'd like guide you through.
Yeah, I got lost on so many of these, and some of the officers were really rude about it when I turned up like only 10 minutes late. I was so proud of myself for only being 10 minutes
You did
late.
good. You did good.
I'm sorry, I'm waffling so much in this because it's such like an in-depth topic basically.
We're unearthing some buried trauma again.
We are. So what I ended up doing was being a receptionist, and this ended up being my worst nightmare because it was literally strangers phoning me. I was having to deal with like phone numbers. People would say like, oh, can you read back my phone number to me? And I struggle to read out strings of numbers. I stumble over them. You know, like those one-time password things that everyone like mails to you or whatever these days to log in online.
To log into stuff.
I always type them in wrong and then end up locking myself out of my own accounts and stuff.
No.
The world isn't set up for people who don't have number brains.
Yeah, a receptionist is basically like the worst job. Everything
really
that you
was.
struggle with is in there.
It was the only place that had offered to hire me, and they were going to pay me money, so I was like, I've just got to take this for what it's worth. But
And you did.
but it wasn't necessarily going well. Now with like hindsight, with everything that I know about this autism, this is sort of like a recurring theme that you'll notice throughout this, is that I realised that this was like a really bad job for me, but I didn't understand that at the time because, like I said, there wasn't these conversations back then. All I knew about myself was that I had social anxiety, and even back then you couldn't really tell people you had social anxiety. That was seen as like a really like nutty mental illness to have.
That was like the response, wasn't it? It was like, oh, you're different.
Yeah.
I mean, it's so much better now.
Because I was dealing with like panic attacks, and if I ever mentioned that to like people, they'd all be like, oh, that's like really extreme to have like a panic attack. Whoa, you must be really like unwell. So that was something else that I just completely masked about my personality, and I was like, yep, I'm an extrovert just like everybody else. Hello, people.
Time to lie.
Yeah. And I feel like all these different parts of myself that I've been talking about that I've had to like repress like over the years, more recently, especially since I started to suspect that I might be autistic, I started to like embrace them. Like I really started to let myself like buy plushies. I got really into jelly cats for a while because I love the textures and like how sensory they feel.
And they're really cute.
And my sketchbooks, I really started to embrace like mixed mediums, and I think that's like a very sort of sensory thing. I love the joy of like playing with like stickers and the sticky sensations. I like playing with glue and scissors and
like ribbons, different textures of paper, different art supplies.
yeah,
and stuff.
so like the more hands-on it is. And then I started to look back at like my old artwork, which was sort of like my Rimsey's work, which I refer back to quite a bit. And that goes back to sort of like my sensory kind of stuff. And I feel like my artwork has gone through this sort of whole process where like I used to be like unapologetically myself. Then I tried to sort of mask, and my artwork almost like masked in that process as well. I was trying to draw what other people drew. I was drawing a lot of like lookbook ladies for a while, even though I'm not interested in fashion in like the slightest.
You were just trying to fit in, which is like masking, isn't it?
But I was rewarded for fitting in for such a long time that I think that's it just comes so innately to me that I wasn't even like purposefully doing it at that point.
The masking had just become like a natural response.
Yeah, whereas over like these past few years, I've really allowed myself to just sort of play with like bright coloured tapes and just slap them in my sketchbook. And then every now and then I'll get a comment from someone who says, you know, that isn't like archival when you put like glitter glue in your sketchbook. And I'm like, I don't care, I'm not here to be an archival artist.
Yeah, that's a job application for somebody else.
Plus, I feel like we're living in such a different time era now, where archival has a totally different meaning to it, because you can take a photograph of something and then that technically lasts forever, unless like the internet gets like torn down as like a society, and that's a whole different issue. But a photograph can last like a really, really, really long time.
Of course it can, yeah.
Can potentially preserve things better than what like the original traditional piece could in the first place anyway. That was my really long roundabout way of saying that I went through life kept telling me that I was doing things wrong, and then I finally got to an age where I'm out in the world, I'm not really accountable by anyone else, because I was never able to be hired by anyone else. I had to figure out how to find work myself, how to make jobs for myself, how to set up shops online, how to sell things, how to sell myself to people.
Be careful.
As an artist.
Like that. Oh my god.
Not
she definitely didn't do that. I can promise you that. She means like commissioned artwork and stuff. Oh my god, hun.
Anyway, that's just an example of me being neurodivergent and saying the wrong thing. I know a lot of people who are artists and they're like solo in their apartment and struggling to get like in the mood to draw, but they feel more like drawing when they're around like friends.
Yeah.
So the idea of this is so that you can like draw along with us if that's your thing, or you can drink a cup of tea with us if that's your thing, because I do have a bowl of iced tea here, which I will have a sip of right now.
We are more than happy to be your guys' background noise while you do art, do chores, do anything really.
But we're here to keep you company through whatever it is that you're going through.
Because Steph, as you have probably heard today, has been through it. If this is the first video that you've seen about Steph talking about her autism, I'm going to put the video on screen of where she discusses it a bit more in depth last week, so do check that out.
Or if you'd like to hang out for another Doodles and tea, I'm going to put the playlist up on screen, because we've got a bunch of these.
Plenty of bangers. And don't forget to like and subscribe, so we can see you next time for another Doodle Date.
Doodle Date!